I want to thank all the Cahuilla peoples for allowing me to be a guest on their land. It's a beautiful day and we have rain, so we're doubly blessed. As we all know, just a brief, very accurate statement. 100% of the land in California is unceded land. So think about that while we're having our little talk today. And of course, you see the name is Native News from a Native lens, the good, the bad, and the truly horrific. And it really is. So I won't belabor Clint Eastwood too much. But I wanted to start this with an email I received last week. You know, I get a lot of pitches at my job at the Arizona Republic Indigenous Affairs reporter. Everybody seems to think that anything having to do with Indian country, send it to Deb. She could use it. Well, this very nice lady from a major magazine, which I won't embarrass her by saying the name of, sent me this email. How Indigenous autonomy can help us battle climate change. The indigenous communities of North America have long fought for self-rule and sovereignty, and while much is at stake for these groups specifically, the reality is there's much at stake for everyone. With climate change rapidly intensifying, the need for indigenous sovereignty has never been clearer, as these communities may be the key to solutions in many environmental issues. So their cover article examines how larger society and our planet stand to benefit from the autonomy of indigenous communities, something these groups have only recently made progress on in Canada and the United States. And I was specifically pitched to interview the writer, who is a non-Indian, by the way, on how the Karuk, Yurok, Hupa, and Klamath tribes keep order by regularly subjecting their terrain to low-level burns that prevent severe fires and maintain uncluttered areas, promoting game and useful plant species. Unfortunately, with the land no longer theirs in the eyes of the law, performing such burns is no longer in their jurisdiction. With park services and other government agencies not having the funding or manpower to perform burns, wildfires are occurring at a needlessly high rate. It goes on in this vein. They offer to hook me up with the non-Indian author, the photographer who does have indigenous heritage in a Siberian community, which is majorly cool. And this nice lady also offered to connect me up to the tribal leaders of these 4 tribes. Well, there's only one problem with that, folks, and here's what I replied. Hi, thanks for your note. I've been covering these issues for more than 20 years, so I'm glad to see that X magazine is finally jumping on the bandwagon. You should be aware I won an award from the Society of Environmental Journalists for reporting almost the exact same thing 2 years ago here at the Arizona Republic, and during the pandemic at that. In fact, I'll bet the writers talked to the same people that I did. I also worked on a podcast about indigenous fire stewardship in Yurok country 4 years ago with my cousin, fellow Salian Indian broadcast journalist Allison Herrera, who now works for Newsy. And I've continued to report on this subject for not only the Arizona Republic, but many other publications. So I'm not sure why you sent me this, because I've already been reporting on these issues for decades. Thank you, but no, I'm not interested in interviewing these other people. I can call them myself. And here's where I got a little snarky. I'd forward our current subscription offer, but since my current reporting is grant funded, you can read it for free. And you can see why I'm just a bit frustrated with well-meaning PR people thinking this is the latest thing in indigenous reporting. This is one of the things that we indigenous journalists have to put up with regularly, is that we've already been doing the work. We've been out there in the field, we've been writing for whoever will take our stuff, whether it's the Arizona Republic, USA Today, The Revelator, High Country News, Indian Country Today, Native News Online. I could go on and on and on. But when the big guys just happen to come across this, all of a sudden it's brand new. It's like, oh my gosh, we've magically discovered that indigenous people still have their culture and they're still trying to do their indigenous land stewardship. So this is kind of the latest example of indigenous journalism over the years, and it's certainly not a pretty picture. A survey by the nonprofit Illuminative found that 40% of the people they surveyed weren't aware any natives were still alive. And in the mainstream, tropes have dominated the coverage, you know, all the myths about us. It's all about casinos, poverty, suicide, substance abuse, the vanishing Indian, which is probably why 40% of all the survey respondents thought there weren't any of us around. And then when you do get something in a legacy newspaper or magazine, the pictures invariably feature dancing Indians in powwow regalia. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be a very serious conference. It could be something on climate change. It could be National Congress of American Indians. There's still a dancing Indian in powwow regalia. So one of the things that I speak on regularly is how we Native reporters can help make legacy news better. The first thing is we know our communities. We know how to engage with Native people respectfully without being extractive. You know, one of the big things is you have these academics and you have these reporters and you have all these guys coming, oh, tell me your story, but nothing ever comes of it except the reporter gets a nice award. There's ways to do it where you're giving back to that community as well as the community. It's more like sharing rather than giving. Now, we know our histories. We can write with authority. And hopefully we know how to avoid the tropes and stereotypes without sacrificing good journalism. And I'm saying hopefully because unfortunately some of my Native journalist friends sometimes fall into those same tropes. They'll think everything's a powwow. You know, they're really immersed in what we call pan-Indian culture. And they forget that not all Native tribes do powwow. A lot of us do a lot of different things, our big times, the green corn festivals, the potlatches. And one of the pieces of advice I always give, not only a non-Native journalist, but a Native journalist is, learn about the community that you're reporting on. If you're a journalist from one of the what we call the big tribes, the big land-based treaty tribes, as we call them, and all you know is powwow culture because that's what you grew up with, and that's great, that's wonderful. But if they end up sending you off to Bangor, Maine to work for the Gannett paper there, the Wabanaki, which are the 4 tribes of Maine, the people of the Dawn, have a completely different culture. They have a completely different history and history of engagement with the United States government. They're recognized differently. The legislation that recognized them forbade them from opening up casinos because that's the price they had to pay to get their sovereignty and their land back. They're still dealing with the federal and state governments on things like water and land and fishing. And their songs are different. A few years ago, I went to Bar Harbor, or as the Mainers call it, Bahaba, to go to the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance gathering. And they had a Wabanaki drum group. They have their own way of doing drum. They have their own songs. Their beats are different. Their regalia is different. And this very nice young man from one of the Plains tribes, I don't know which one, I honestly don't, who was going to the University of Maine at Orono, shows up in his powwow regalia. Well, hey, you know, that's fine. We want to do some cultural sharing. And the poor kid was trying to dance to the Wabanaki songs. And finally he went to them and he said, I'm having trouble with, you know, why am I having trouble? Usually I don't have any trouble. They said, well, these are Wabanaki drum songs. And if you're a journalist and if you find yourself in Maine, if you find yourself in Alaska, which has a totally different relationship in the United States, if you find yourself here in California, where our story is 100% different, our engagements were different. We don't have any treaties. 1/3 of all the tribes are not currently recognized either because we fell through the cracks or because of termination. The land bases are different. The issues might be the same, but how tribes try to deal with it is different. Our genocide was totally different than everybody else's. And it's not because we're not trying to make ourselves out, well, our genocide was better than your genocide, because no genocide is good, folks, let's face it. But the way it all happened was different. And if you're from, let's say, I don't want to pick on my Navajo brothers and sisters, but if you're, because there's a lot of journalists from Navajo, there's a lot of journalists from Hopi, there's a lot of journalists from the Dakota tribes, the Lakota tribes, and they show up in California and they need to educate themselves on how our histories, our current issues, so that when they write, they can write it from a position of, I understand how things work here. And that goes double and triple for non-Indian journalists, because not only do they have to make sure they understand about the different cultures of Native America, but they have to get over a lot of bad habits, like assuming everything's powwow. So one of the things I always like to tell people is there are some resources now, and I'm going to share some of them with you. Download these. If you get on the internet, they're not hard to find. Download them, and for heaven's sakes, use them. So one of the things is Duncan McHugh, who's a wonderful man. I believe, I want to say he's Cree, but he's definitely from one of the First Nations in Canada. He's a journalism professor and a very, very smart man. He has an Indigenous reporting guide, and a lot of it is developed for Canadian First Nations, but most of the concepts works for all of us. But you can distill this down to 5 little things we call it the dreaded WD4, or how to avoid tropes and stereotypes. So, journalist, if your story has any of these out of context, your story's in trouble. My friends here who are readers and want to be critical readers, if you start seeing a lot of these over and over again from the same newspaper, you need to call the editor and please refer them to some of these reporting guides, because their reporting's in trouble. So the dreaded WD4, you can see, if your story has lots of stories about dead Indians, drunk Indians, drumming Indians, dancing Indians, well, unless you're covering a powwow or the World Championship hoop dance or a bird dance competition, your story's in trouble. And of course, the last is W for warrior, the great Native warrior trope. Yes, it is true. We honor our veterans, and we do our best to make sure that they are all cared for and that they are taken care of. But for some reason, non-Indians tend to make them into some sort of a mythical figure, and we know that's not the case. So keep an eye on that. So I like the Native American Association reporting guides. This is my favorite. As you can tell, there's a big arrow pointing towards it. A lot of times, these journalists have trouble finding somebody who can talk within the community. Maybe not talk for the community, but talk within the community. And you can follow this little thing about how you can find a person who is a voice of authority and who hopefully would be willing to talk to you. And you can download it. It's pretty cute. The difference between a Native community member who has a PhD or is a tribal leader versus a Native person in that community who is an elder an acknowledged cultural person, someone acknowledged with deep information about that community, well, they go in the heck yeah. And over here on the other side, you end up with, this person is indigenous and has an opinion, that's it. Well, go find someone else, folks. Although I do confess I have occasionally done the Indian on the street survey, which is okay too, as long as it's clearly denoted. This is just a tribal member who agreed to talk with me, Indian on the street. That's great. So now I'm going to kind of share a few things about what I look to see to be good reporting. Graham Brewer did a pretty good job with this story about the non-Indian firm that basically copyrighted that local Lakota language and is trying to charge the tribe to get a lot of the materials back. So if you get a chance, take a look at that one. This one is not by me. This one is actually by a non-native journalist who went up to interview people during the latest pipeline fire. But Melina's a smart girl. First thing she did was come and talk to the native journalist on staff. There's 3 of us right now, two Navajos and me. Kind of got some tips, some things to avoid, avoid these tropes. There's not one word about poverty in this. There's not one word about vanishing Indian. It's like one of the things that was happening in the pipeline fire was we did have some tribal members who were having issues, and she thought it was important enough to raise because there's a lot of stuff happening with the pipeline fire. And then we have within Gannett a process that if somebody needs someone who's more of an expert than they are to read the story and make sure that there's no mistakes made or no tropes. So I went ahead and read the story. It was great. So the only thing I had her add was that the San Francisco Peaks are sacred to more tribes than the Navajo. But hey, that's fine. This one's good. I have to say that it's co-written by me, but and a lot of this is going to be about my own people because we want to show the difference between good reporting and bad reporting. And the example here is that if you want to get something right, you might end up having to do it yourself. Because when we start getting to the bad, oh my gosh, it's getting to the bad. This is the famous New York Times story that Native American Journalists Association issued a formal protest about, that this was a non-Indian lady who went up to Nunavut, went up to Cape Dorset, and it's full of every single trope and stereotype you can possibly imagine. There's a tradition up there in the far north that you don't knock on the door, you just go in the house because it might be 30 below Fahrenheit and you don't want to freeze to death waiting for someone, and you just go and you go in the house and you wait to be greeted. She calls it, we're just barging into these people's houses. Totally not understanding, not respecting. It was all about, how the art was supposed to save these peoples of the far north, and it's pretty bad. But if you ever get a chance to read it, just read it with a critical eye. Now, I want to get more back into my people because these are the people I know the most about. You see, 1937, fire water heap bad for Indian, fine $5 here. Granted, it was 1937, but this is just an example of the tropes and stereotypes that have plagued journalism over the years. And of course, it happens to be a member of my tribe. We call ourselves Xolon Indians because we're the Xolon Band, the Valley of the Big Oaks. Over here is the same newspaper, now owned by Gannett, by the way. 1991, Salian Indians slip into oblivion. Historians say little known about tribe. Well, nobody bothered to come and talk to any actual Salian Indians for this story, so naturally it's, they're just a dying tribe. Now we have the truly horrific. This is very recently. You can tell, June the 10th, Dark Winds joins Reservation Dogs in Rutherford Falls in a distinctive microgenre of series featuring Native American communities. Apparently, the reporter thought that we're only a microgenre. I mean, I've heard about us being other, but this takes other to a whole new light. It's truly horrific. And here's another truly horrific story. Granted, this is an opinion column, but the Arizona Republic ran it as is with no rebuttals. Granted, this was before I came on the scene. This lady is a person of color, for some reason, has associated herself with Fox News and Trump, and I don't know how anyone feels about that, but what she feels about my people, there was a bombing range that was proposed by the U.S. Navy in some of our most sacred sites, which happens to be on an Army base. The Army had been working with us to preserve those sites until somebody from the BIA called them and said, "You cannot talk with them. They are not on the BIA list of recognized tribes." So they had to quit working with us, but they're still kind of doing stuff on the side. This was in the middle of when they were still helping us out. The bombing site was proposed. We opposed it. Environmentalists opposed it. A lot of people from Big Sur opposed it. And it finally came to pass that the Navy saw the light and decided, well, maybe it's not a good idea to bomb all of these cultural and sacred sites in Stony Valley. So her opinion said that Salian Indians opposed the bombing range on culturally significant sites because the bombing noise would offend their buried ancestors. I mean, and this is 21st century, folks. And this is not just my tribe. This is a lot of other tribes get this treatment by the mainstream media, which is why I chose to end up going with the Arizona Republic, because we need more of us, and we need more journalists from diverse tribes going into mainstream journalism. Right now, we have an opportunity to help kind of move this ship around a little bit. I realize it's kind of like moving the direction of the Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management and National Park Service, but you have to make a start somewhere. So, if you want to know more, here's some places that you can come and look. I know this is being recorded, so you can go back and look and examine this later. And to Sep, thank you for joining us today. Here's my contact info. You're always welcome to contact me, to tell me something's wrong in a story, to tell me something's right in a story, to tell me something's ugly in a story, or why the heck you write that, Deb? Excuse me. So I will now take any questions that people might want to have.